So I think we should get started. It's been a couple of minutes. I think most people will be on, and if so, Jose, I wanted to start with this work in particular because I've noticed that several of your bodies of work relate to your daily life, to what to see around you. And your work, you don't so much transform material as you do incorporate it and almost use it, as is. And you reconfigure it, you create compositions. And I've always, I always wondered how you came up with the idea of using these ratchet straps to make art. And the ratchet straps play this kind of heroic role of, like, Atlas holding up the world with these heavy materials. Would you share your how did you come about making this type of work?
Yeah, well, it is precisely what you mentioned, Pedro, that I'm always very aware of my surroundings, uh, because actually I was bringing large stones, boulders, into my studio for working with them for other sculptures. And normally the way we handled these stones was placing them on a pallet and then adjusting the stone to the pallet with ratchet straps so it wouldn't move or fall. And then with a forklift, we could actually move these stones. And somehow, at some point, I realized, almost as an epiphany in a way, that these beautiful objects, but also the result of a great deal of technical solution, which they provide, they were already there. They were already performing a function, but they were already an object that was very common in my studio at some point. So in a very organic way, I just thought, okay, I need to incorporate this into my work because it's already forming part of my work. It's just that somehow I'm not taking it to the last level, or people is not actually seeing it, but it's already there. So I would say in that sense that it's more that, like, ratchet straps came into my work rather than me finding them. They found me in a way. They were in the work.
Wonderful, wonderful. And this leads me to one of the signature works in your current show here with Sean Kelly, which is the Acapulco chair stack. And I wanted to put an image of an Acapulco chair so that people know what we're talking about. This is a very famous chair that we find throughout Mexico, and it's also a chair that I think works really well for our hot and humid climate. And this is the piece you made, which is called Acapulco Chair Stack. And can you tell us the story behind this piece and why you found it so compelling?
Yeah, well, I used to work with a welder, with a metal welder. That was one of the only things I was actually not being able to do in-house in my studio. And actually, I developed quite a good friendship relationship with this welder, and I enjoyed very much going to his very particular workshop. As you know, how Mexican they're normally very messy, untidy, not very well structured in many ways. And as I was there again working for something else, I looked around and I saw these, like, stacks of unfinished Acapulco chairs, which at some point he was trying to do to sell, this like Acapulco chair project, but he wasn't able to actually do it. But he had the stacks of this chair, and as I was working with these other sculptures, I turned around and it just popped up in my mind like, oh, wow, this is like the, let's say, Mexican version of the bottle rack from the shop. No, it just like it struck me when I saw it. So then I asked the welder, would you sell to me these Acapulco chairs? And he said, oh no, I can't. I haven't finished them, and it's a project that I haven't finished, and it's a bit difficult. And I said, no. I mean, just as they are. You're like, what? Really? Yeah, yes, just as they are. Actually, in fact, I need you to help me to put some points of welding into them, exactly what I'm going to tell you where, because I want them just exactly as they are, just as I found them, in the most literal sense of a ready-made, right? Yeah. So he obviously thought, well, I don't know, this guy is a bit funny, but let's do it. And of course, if you want to buy them as they are, perfect.
You probably thought you were crazy, no?
Yes, yes. So he welded them. I took them to my studio, and actually I had them sitting in my studio for a long time because my original intention was to somehow finish them with the threading, but in a more complex way. But I realized at some point that that was actually not the very original essence of the work. It was by doing this complicated threading, I was taking this work away from the natural essence of a ready-made, let's say. And so I just kept them around because I am a natural keeper of objects and things and materials and found whatever that I keep in my studio in what I called, like my ecosystem of objects. And I kept them for years, actually. And when I was working another piece for the show, the one that has a bicycle wheel with a very clear intention of paraphrasing, making an homage, and also uh, a joke in a way, a very Duchampian way, was like Duchamp was having always a lot of, how do you say in English? Not comedy, but he was trying to introduce in art also the way about like
humor,
joking, no?
Yeah.
Humor.
Yeah. Humor.
So he was, and it's something very difficult to introduce in art, humor, no?
Yeah.
So I was actually working with this bicycle wheel in a humoristic way because it's a bit twisted and it's old and but it was obviously after and because of Duchamp. I remember I had this Duchampian rack, but it was very Mexican one with the Acapulco chairs. So I pulled it out. It didn't have the threads. I thought like, okay, I'm not obviously going to use the threads, but it was in a way to make it even a little bit better, like stable. It was better to put some stones in order to use it as a structure that counterbalances itself.
Yeah. So the structure cradles these stones that give it stability. But when in looking at this image while you were speaking, it also almost looks like a drawing or a sketch, and it reminded me a bit of your cutout works, which are also in the show. You have several Roy Lichtenstein works that are cut out, and this kind of reminds me of that in the sense of really highlighting the negative space.
I've always been fascinated actually by sculptures or works that are like an amphibious between a painting or a drawing and a sculpture. like between the three-dimensional and two-dimensional world, how suddenly certain sculptures are actually drawings in space.
Yeah.
That's the way somehow I understand them. And I was obviously always fascinated by these stacks, also because of this quality you mentioned. They are very much a three-dimensional drawing in a way, right?
Yeah, yeah. And also this idea of using, again, everyday materials to, draw in space, but also the composition is in some cases very simple. So for example, in this next work, again, if this were a drawing, it would be with a very bold, a very bold line. But this piece here, again, you're using stones and I-beams to create a composition. And so there's that relationship with the stacking and the rocks, but also the use of I-beams. And this is from the show we put together at Dallas Contemporary. And I wanted to talk a bit about the use, how because in some ways your work has it has tremendous strength, but it is, the compositions are quite simple.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's actually the power of simplicity, right? Is that when you're able to construct, let's say, a narrative in 3 words, is always stronger than in 1,000 words. No, because in that sense, the message is not diluted. It's just like, the main source of what you're wanting to say with the least elements possible, and in a way that is not complicated. I guess that brings me to my interest in trying to connect in a frequency that it's actually understandable to everyone, not just falling into the cliche of wanting kids to be happy with the work, which obviously it's something very, very nice to happen, but that the frequency of the work can be as profound or as simple as actually the viewer takes the work to. In that sense, I'm proposing a kind of like a trampoline for the people to jump in as deep as they want. And in that sense, the more elements and the more complex the relations between the elements are, the less space I give for the viewer to elaborate. That's the way I see it.
Wonderful. And in contrast to the simplicity of the language and the use of materials, these pieces, again from the show in Dallas, have a they look simple, but they can be quite difficult to install. And, I remember when I had seen these works, I had always been fascinated by them, but I'd never seen one in person. And I had definitely never been involved in installing a piece or watched it happen. And this is, it looks very precise, and it looks like something that would be, when I saw it, I said, oh, great, this will be an easy piece to install. It's just an I-beam and a wire and a rock. And then when in the process of installation, it actually turned out to be quite suspenseful, intense, and those are big, heavy objects, and they're held aloft by a thin string. Can you talk a bit about these pieces?
Yeah, well, they are indeed. They look simple, but they're not, as you know, right? It's because obviously, I really like when the elements that I'm using in this kind of sculptures are actually working together. They are performing an action, and they are somehow making a very stressful, let's say, performance between them. So they are actually there for a reason. They have a purpose, and that's, yeah, that's very important to me. I was wondering also about, I think you wanted to talk about a certain work
Oh
that,
yeah, sure.
yeah,
Yeah,
we
yeah,
were
yeah.
talking the other day.
Yeah, of course. It was this piece here and the next one, which I'm very I have to say I had a really great time installing this. Particularly, there was a point where the the wire was pulling at the top of the beam, and it was creating tremendous force and friction down at the hinge, which is what keeps it, you know, tied down at the bottom, and sparks started to fly out, and I realized that we were working with something that was much more than I had anticipated, and the way that I'm really fascinated with a new piece that you have that's called the old tree is worth keeping after all, which is actually this next piece, because it in a way it makes me think about how you took the beam and segmented it, again using the hinges to create this composition. And one of the things that I like really admire about your work is that it goes, there you take a very important step beyond representation and contemplation of the laws of nature and physics by actually employing them in your work.
Yeah.
So, for instance, this beam here that
Yeah.
is kind of folding onto this cylinder, I'm assuming that that's held there together by friction.
Yes, I mean, actually, those that work, as you can see, and I think we talked about, is very much related to the metal I-beams works we did in Dallas Contemporary. Uh, I would say it's a related work. It's a very related work. Maybe couldn't even exist if I had not previously done the work we did in Dallas. And that it's also a way I work normally, is that somehow I learn from every work I do, and that leaves a hint for the next work to do. So there were a few reflections I did in Dallas about, like, how can I somehow uh, complex in a simple way this relation of loss of attraction and dynamics against gravity. And I had these wooden beams that were used for the railways in Mexico. So they are very resistant and they are very old. I like time has passed onto them, and time has made already a contribution to their form sculptorically. It's something I couldn't have done. So I'm trying to involve the passage of time into the language and the aesthetics of the work, but I'm also just working, as we did in Dallas, with the relation of forces. And
and this takes me to a very important interest of me, which is the transformation of materials, in the sense that they are something as long as they are performing a certain function. Like these metal beams, they are a sculpture, they are a work of art because of what they are doing and how they are placed in space. If you deassemble the work, then you only have wooden beams. They're nothing but wooden beams. But as long as they're doing what they're doing, the composition between them, then that's what actually makes them be a work of art. And that is something I'm very interested about.
Yeah.
This immateriality of the work.
Well, and quite frankly, it's like you're a magician, you know, and you're taking. Jose, I was saying that sometimes I think you're like a magician, you know, taking these old beams, which, as you say, have this wonderful character, and making them dance in space. Again, a reference to the drawings that you were talking about, the amphibious artwork.
Yes, it's. I mean, it's very important to be able to understand the natural qualities of certain materials and then transforming that quality through the action they are doing. No, it's a metaphysical way of working with materials, let's say, and it's almost as you know, in the Middle Ages, when they wanted to convert things into gold, they were trying to actually, the alchemists, make something out of something else. So I guess that endeavor of the alchemists, I guess it's something that it can be very much taken into account into the art making process. No? Yeah. We're actually trying to let's say make something that moves you, something that strikes a poetic chord with you, but sometimes maybe it's actually something that it's just a piece of trash. It's not about beauty. It's about the strength of the transmission that you're getting from what you're looking at. No?
Yeah. Thank you. That's really wonderful. I wanted to talk about this work because I remember it's an untitled piece, but it says the fable of the apple, or an explanation waiting to happen. And you know, when I saw this piece, I immediately thought about Isaac Newton and our conversations about Newton. Again, our show in Dallas took place in January of 2019.
Yeah.
And so, you know, before the pandemic, obviously. And but it seemed like you know, but you got me, our conversations around Newton related to this work, Newton's Fault, which was in the exhibition, made me look into Newton a bit. And I discovered that in 1666, fleeing the bubonic plague, he had to take time off from his university studies at Cambridge and went to his country home where there was a giant apple tree. And although it has never been proven that his, that the apple actually fell from the tree and hit him on the head, it is well documented that he was fascinated watching the apples fall, and that they would fall straight to earth and not go off up into the sky or into the air. And this is before anyone had ever used the term gravity. I mean, he invented it. So, but what you and I discussed, which I can't forget, which made a big impact, was this idea of what was his real genius? Was it discovering gravity and the basic laws of physics? Or was it the fact that he came up with an anecdote, a simple anecdote, to help people understand what gravity was by making it something very personal, an apple falling from a tree and hitting you on the head.
You know, that conversation fascinates us, right? because it comes to the point whether you have to reflect if it's possible in a certain way that he was not the first person ever on Earth to think about the force of gravity. And there are actually some speculations that other like scientifics and even Greeks somehow were talking about the force, but he was the one that through this anecdote, true or false, but this anecdote, he was able to transmit the idea. He was able to make the concept comprehensible somehow for everyone. A touch of genius. I mean, that's a geniality. I mean, to be able to bring down this very complex way of understanding something that no one has ever explained before into a very simple anecdote that everyone can relate to, with an apple falling on your head, which it even has a little bit of humor also. No, it has a certain kind of self-pityness, you know. It's obviously a strike of genius, and therefore I guess you find a lot of common ground, or at least I personally find a very appealing common ground with art, because I think art actually shares a lot of those intentions. Art is like finding a vehicle to express very personal or very deep or very complex or very structured, different, very poetic concepts in a way that to transmit that to everyone. It's not science for scientifics, but it's like science for the general public.
Yes. No, thank you. I also want to point out that this work in particular relies on a very basic law of nature, which is balance and friction. And you know, it's a piece that in one occasion someone didn't believe that it was just resting on top of each other and knocked the piece over. So I think that, you know, I really admire how you use these, you know, how you actually apply these laws into your work.
Yeah,
so,
I mean, no, go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead. I was just wanting.
I was saying, like, I remember when someone in Germany actually kicked the sculpture just to make sure, in a way, like to, you know, trying to see like what's inside the hat of the magician. Where does the rabbit actually hides? No, because he's like, he was, I guess, very skeptical about that could have been just by balance. So he was trying to kick it in order to be clever and say like, you know, there's a rabbit hiding there. But it turned out it wasn't. And I'm just really glad one of the beams actually didn't fall directly onto his foot. And
yes.
So obviously, because of this kind of behavior, which is understandable, I mean, I'm not saying one should actually break artworks or just touch them or erase them or anything. I'm just saying that it's understandable that they arise curiosity. And I find that very actually very nice. You know, it's a compliment that they find it that curiosity actually beats them in order to actually do something that is not allowed.
No, that they
they
couldn't
are so
resist. Yeah, no, I agree.
Yeah, so it's a compliment for me that they cannot resist. But because of this, I obviously we have to consolidate sculptures to be able to secure them, obviously, for reasons of not getting anyone harmed. However, it is very important to point out that when I am working in the studio with sculptures, the way in they are balanced, their precarious equilibrium, their positioning of the stones, counterweights, etc., it's always real. We never used, let's say, like fake inner structures to balance it. So then you're actually creating like a cantilever of fake weights. They're always like real. Once they're finished, and once they're actually like standing up, and I'm saying, okay, this is good. Afterwards, we have to create like a internal security structure, but it's only for the sake of security. It's never for the sake of balance or gravity counterweight.
I see. So you're not compensating. It's true in itself. Thank you for that.
Yes.
I wanted to actually talk, you mentioned this piece earlier in reference to the Acapulco chairs and Duchamp, and the bicycle wheel on the stool is one of my favorite works of art. And so when I saw this, I assumed that was the reference, and I like this piece very much. And but is this the first time you've put this kind of object on a block of concrete? Because I was thinking to myself, and I couldn't remember another norm. I've seen you put stones on concrete or use ratchet straps, but not this kind of object.
No, I'm now finally coming out of the Stones age.
Good.
I'm trying to evolve a little bit into allowing myself to elaborate with different objects that have also, wider sometimes meanings or different kind of references. So it is indeed, I think. I did before, well, the first time in the Sydney Biennial.
Oh, that's true.
In 2020, I actually was using different kind of objects that I found on site on Kakadu Island, the place where I got to work in the Biennial. And that island has the particularity of being all of it considered heritage, because it was the very first how do you say, carcelaria?
Prison.
Yeah, it was one of the first like prison units that were established there in the Sydney Harbor. So it has a very important history, and the whole island is considered to be heritage. And therefore, I wanted to explore the concept of heritage, saying, well, if the island is heritage and everything on the island is heritage, then whatever object I grab, whether it to be a piece of rubble or a piece of whatever thing I found on the island was heritage. So I was able to make a display with these like concrete volumes and place on top of them, on side of them, with ratchet straps, without ratchet straps, all different kinds of relations. Things I was like picking up in the island as a magpie, let's say. The work was actually able to stay in the collection of the New South Wales Art Gallery, because it was the only institution who could actually collect this, because otherwise they wouldn't have left the work to leave the island, because all the objects were were heritage. So the work was actually ephemeral in that sense, but now was able to be translated, like not translated, Jose trasladado, taken into the New South Wales Art Gallery, moved, and be part of their collection. So I was very happy about it. But that was the first time I used an object that was not a stone.
That's fantastic. And you know, one of the things that I like about this piece is the geometry, the combination of a rectangle and the circle, the lines. Again, it goes back to what you were saying earlier about these amphibious works that are kind of sculptures that remind you of drawings and kind of create these shapes in space. I wanted to, also talk about the piece this commission we did in Boston, To Each Era Its Art, to Art Its Freedom, and see here what you did with shape, rocks, and also color. Living in Boston during the lockdown, there were parts of the year that feel very cold, and we installed this in, God, it must have been early November when you came up to install this, and I was very happy that you brought us such a warm color. Can you talk a bit about site-specific installations during the pandemic and what led you to do this piece? But before you start, I also wanted to show you these two images of how loved these pieces are, and people have really been flooding to them. And there's someone there who's actually laying down on it and using the rock as a headrest.
Great, that's fantastic. Well, I guess that is one of the nice things to make these conversations, because you're able to talk about certain things that are not always explicit to everyone, and that I'm not the kind of artist who intends to give this information to justify the work. I use it as a personal way of working to develop a piece. No, so all the works have a lot of references, some very personal, some to art history, some to other artworks of mine, or to literature, or to different things about poetry. But then I normally don't talk about them, let's say, in the explanation of the work that sometimes is written, in the gallery or in the museum. So it's nice to be able to explain, for example, the color in the public artwork in Boston. It's a very personal reference to a park that was designed in the late 20s or maybe early 30s. I don't remember the very exact date, but it's something around 1932, maybe, by Luis Barragan, in the city of Guadalajara. It's my home city. It was his home city as well. And he designed this park all with this like red concrete. All the concrete had this red pigment. And I used to be taken there by my parents to play as a kid. It had a really nice games area in a way. So I have a personal attachment, or I'm just, let's say, very fond of this red pigmented concrete. And it was the first time I used it for an artwork, actually. I think it was you and the team in Boston who suggested I could actually think about coloring in the concrete for the work, which I welcome very much that suggestion. And boom, my immediate relation was red concrete. I could not take the red concrete out of my mind. because it made a straight relation to the playfulness red concrete had in my memory as a kid. So then I thought, okay, well, if I want to make this artwork playful in relation to the use for people in Boston on red concrete. So I guess that's somehow how you take certain decisions, right? Sometimes they are just very personal or rooted in personal history.
No, it's well. I'm glad your personal history brought us this warm color because, and as you can see, Boston people in Boston love it. So it's been.
I'm really glad about it. Really glad.
Also, one thing I've noticed a lot in this show in particular, and in your work, in some of your work, is the use of circles, right? In this piece here, completed cycle, and you know, you when we chatted a bit before the show, you were talking about, you know, the circle and the inability of humans to draw a perfect circle without mechanical aid. You were talking a bit about also you were talking about, you know, in that desire, right, to achieve perfection,
Yeah.
you know, exists in humanity. But then you mentioned the transformation of material. And so I'd love you to talk a bit about this piece.
Yes, thank you, because I think it's a piece that very much summarizes a lot of references, ideas, and concepts that build this show. Because I guess, as you know, the whole show departed from a very simple reflection on how, as humans, we are not, I don't know, anatomically equipped. Even if you're a great draughtsman, to draw by hand, by freehand, a perfect circle, it's something that is just somehow unattainable, unachievable. There are great stories about Giotto having been commissioned a mural because one of the popes that was commissioning this mural at the time, Giotto, was actually the draft he sent to be able to get the job was just a circle, only a circle. But it was supposedly like a perfect circle. And the Pope said, okay, that's the artist we're going to hire. Instead of other people that were sending like projects of very detailed like murals, right? I mean, there are many like funny stories behind the circle. And I was just reflecting about this impossibility that we have as humans to do it. Early time of the pandemic, drawing with my daughter and thinking about this. And that was what made the show started. But also, I realized that one of the simple actions that I did as a kid was grabbing sand or, you know, like soil, dirt with my hand and letting it like fall. And somehow when you do this, as when you do with sand clogs, they actually make a perfect circle. And so I was reflecting upon how gravity is able to actually draw a perfect circle. And three-dimensionally, it's a sphere. That's why, like, you know, normally force of gravity compresses things in spheric shapes. And this sphere is made of glass, with glass is compressed sand. So there's a circular relation in the transformation of the material, in my own interests, in my relation to gravity, and my personal history also of this glass reflective spheres were a very common decoration object in Tlaquepaque. They are produced, a town next to Guadalajara. And the painter Chucho Reyes gave Barragán one as a present, which he later placed on his house, which is now a reference in architectural history, right?
Yeah.
So talking about circularity, you know, these sort of like close the circle in all the subjects that I was working with in the show. So that's why I also titled it Full Completed Cycle, because it closes the circle on the show, but in itself, you know, it's a cycle of the material being just like sand, being a circle on the ground, but being a sphere on top. So
yeah, and you had mentioned the idea of how, you know, sand is used to create glass. So there's this transformative representation here as well. I am
precisely, exactly.
I wanted, staying on the theme of the circle, could you tell us a bit about you know, these new paintings in the show?
Yes, of course. It's something I'm really happy about, to be able to articulate the show through this group of works, which hadn't been shown together or hadn't been the articulation of the show per se. This group of works, because I've been painting all my life in a certain way, and I like very much painting, and it gives me a great deal of freedom that it's very different from working with sculpture, and therefore the way I approach painting is a bit like conceptual painting, because it's not about painting that relates to the manifestation of an impulse. It's like my paintings are not last minute decisions whenever I'm in front of the canvas, which I respect very much, that kind of painting. I'm not saying they're better or anything like that. I'm just saying it's a different way to approach painting, into which I use them as a result of a lot of research, graphical research, which is a way I work in cutouts. But in this way, I was researching how basically in the 20th century and 21st century, okay, who has really like focused on circles, and to my surprise, in a way, the amount of the presence of circles in painting is overwhelming. It's something there. And as I was just researching about circles, I realized I was actually making, let's say, a small an encyclopedic research of circles in painting. And therefore, I wanted to use these circles as palettes, as the palette for me to compose new paintings using these existing circles that relate to history of painting. But they're very famous, and they've been used by Jasper Jones and by Hilma Klint and by Duchamp and by I don't know. I mean, so many painters that I can talk about, and then I use them. I take them lenders to be able to create new meaning with something that has been there in the history of art, which is something I do, and which is something I find really compelling doing. It's like using elements that have been present to create new meaning. And I guess that's something that relates very much to science, because also, you know, all these different kind of research is there for scientists to come up with new explanations or new theories upon the research of other scientists. And I guess that takes us to that famous phrase by Newton. He was saying he was standing on the shoulders of giants who hadn't patented their discoveries in a way. So,
wow, that it's really great how how you think so much in relation to science and art, and yeah, I find that fascinating. You know, we're almost out of time, but I thought we'd open it up to questions from the public. If anyone has a question, please feel free to type, you know, to send us send us something in the chat. Otherwise we'll continue here. There's and I'm assuming, Jose, that in these smaller works on cardboard, this is a continuation of that process of the encyclopedia of the circle in art history. I also love these works when you compose them, you know, because there's this, you know, I love the fact that you're using cardboard to make art.
well, yes, I mean, it's a material I love. It's a material with tons of beautiful references. It's also very, needless to say, in the era of shipping and Amazon and the pandemic, and I mean, we are surrounded by cardboard boxes. Everything somehow comes in a cardboard box, somehow. And also working with these works allows me to be able to give a looser way of expressing myself with this kind of, just impulses, because this work is very, it has oppositional poles in the way of making, because it takes a great deal of time of choosing the graphic to silk screen on top of cardboard, and then do all the process of silk screening, which then I make several ones, because silk screen offers you the possibility to repeat. So the whole process of choosing the graphics, making the silk screen, printing it on top of many cardboards is very systematic. It takes a lot of time. And all that time, all that planning, all that research comes down to a very impulsive, almost like childlike, not thinking process of composition. It actually, I want to make exactly the opposite of what I do in the painting and what I do in the process of silk screen. And I want to have very direct decisions, not second thoughts, no second guessing. Just I grab the material and I sort of like cut and break and tear apart the cardboard as I go to create, again, as I was talking, new meaning into the cardboards I already silk printed. So it's a very rewarding process for me. I really love working with these cardboard works. it takes a long time to be able to suddenly have for 2 hours the moment of doing it all.
Wow. Well, and so you make the silk screen, you design the graphics, you make the silk screen, you have them printed repeatedly on different fragments of cardboard, and then you begin to play with these different fragments and mix them up. And that's why some are more layered, where you might have 3 or 4, and the colors are so mixed. Is that so? It's very playful.
Exactly. I appreciate and thank you for being able to explain it that way, because my English is quite limited. But when you talked about it, I understood it better. I was struggling to
No,
say it.
I think it's fantastic that you set up this this system for creation, where you have in a way a lexicon or a series of images that you can draw from, and then you begin to play with them. Because I've noticed that some may be 1 or 2 cardboards, some are 3 or 4 cardboards, and then the way you twist them. But I hadn't realized that you're using the same images over and over. Because you're covering up elements and juxtaposing them. It's fantastic. It's a great body of work, and I always love to hear when artists are having fun making their work, right? And this seems like you really enjoy it.
I think it's fundamental to not distance yourself from the very core aspects that made you an artist to begin with. And that actually, I think, generates in the early ages of childhood, when actually making work is about having fun and freedom, creating and elaborating like narratives and systems of, kids actually develop systems for working in a way. I mean, very funny systems, but you find yourself structuring a way to work, but that structure needs to always have the capacity to be fun. You need to have fun. You need to relax. You need to enjoy it. If you're not enjoying it, it's better not to do it, actually.
Good. Well, Jose, we're out of time. I want to thank you for sharing so much insight into this great exhibition here in New York. I'm a big fan of your work. I really enjoy working with you, and I hope I get to see you soon. And also thank you to the Sean Kelly Gallery, Adair, and everyone for putting this together.
I thank you very much, Pedro. As you know, I always enjoy so much talking with you, off the record and on the record. And it's just always a pleasure. And obviously, I want to thank Sean Kelly Gallery, everyone involved. Very important to be able to talk behind the scenes. So I appreciate very much for the gallery giving me this space and you helping me to explain it better. Thank you very much.
Okay. All right, Jose. Well, thank you, and we'll hopefully see each other very soon. Cuídate.
Gracias. Thank you very much.
Gracias. Adiós.